Hey, everybody, and welcome to our presentation or lecture for this week, which is on evaluation, reflection, and termination. This is going to focus a little differently than, say, our previous lecture on assessment and goal setting. There's some overlap here when we're talking about evaluation and termination because there is assessment and goal setting happening even at termination. Whereas we have talked previously about assessment being kind of this continuous thing, there's a strong emphasis at the beginning of assessment, just trying to get to know the individual and what they are wanting to work on or needing to work on. Goal setting obviously being really important at the beginning, but also throughout. But here we're going to really focus on the latter parts of the relationship. The evaluation that take place to specifically for the purposes of understanding when is an appropriate and helpful time to stop the counseling relationship in whatever setting you're working in so that the client can go on and do their own work and live a little more autonomously outside of the counseling relationship. So that's what we're going to talk about today. If I can get to the next slide. There we go. All right, why do we evaluate? It's important to know that not only that it needs to be done, but why we're doing it. The number one reason is really that we're wanting to make sure that what we're doing is helping. We're in this profession to help individuals, and folks typically are coming to us for help or have been brought to us for help by a stakeholder in their life, and evaluation is one of the major ways we understand if what we are doing is actually having a positive impact in the client's life or the impact that they want it to have. So it's similar to assessment, it's kind of an ongoing process, and it allows us to understand how our work is going for the client, what kind of outcomes the client is experiencing in their life, whether it's the outcomes that they're looking for or wanting to move towards. And so we can make adjustments as necessary if not. And so evaluation is really critical for that reason. It also, keeps us from wasting time, our time and our clients' time. It's most of us are going to be doing this professionally, meaning we are going to be getting paid somehow for it, whether it's through a school system or a community agency, or whether you're kind of directly filing for insurance reimbursement. Whatever the case may be, the idea is that we're going to be doing this for a living, meaning we're going to get paid for it, which means that we are placing a monetary value on our time and on our clients' time. And so, making sure that we are using that time for the purposes that the client wants us to use it for is really critical, and evaluation is one way that we do that. It also, it helps us 'cause it's kind of in a self-serving way, because we want to, if our work is going well, if, we want to know if what we are doing and how we are approaching our work, how we're working with the client, is helping. That generally, if it is helping, if it is working, it generally helps us feel better about our work. And even if it's not working, kind of assessing it and being able to adjust can make us feel a little more confident that we're able to be flexible and meet the client where they are and meet the client's needs. So in those ways, it does help us build some confidence. It is because we are doing this professionally, it is emphasized, evaluation is emphasized in almost every work setting, whether it's kind of a managed care setting, meaning, managed care, we typically think about insurance being involved, or whether it is, in a school setting where you are accountable to, teachers and principals and parents and all those kinds of things. So there is a kind of a pragmatic purpose for evaluation in that sense, and we almost are always being held accountable as a professional by some third party, whoever that may be. And evaluation allows us to demonstrate that what we're doing is working. So outcome evaluation, this would be what it sounds like, which is kind of the outcome, the end result of what we're doing, not necessarily at the end of the relationship, but just kind of the consequences or the effects or the outcomes of the work that we're doing. So there's lots of ways to do that. These are just some of the methods listed here. Progress notes, as we've talked about, are a good means of checking in on the work and seeing how changes progressing over time. Global measures and specific measures, we've talked about those a little bit. You'll really cover those in the eval and assessment class, but global measure being something that's going to measure multiple outcomes or multiple symptoms, just depending on whatever the assessment or measure is. And then specific measures being obviously something that's going to really target something like anxiety or depression or a behavioral issue. So it's just going to be you're talking about a global measure being many, general, and then a specific measure being, usually just one or two. Self-recording, and so that could be from the client's purposes, from the client's perspective, excuse me. So, having a client kind of self-record things like anxiety levels or depression levels or, whatever it may be, whatever change that they're wanting to see in their life, using a self-recording method can give you some kind of longitudinal view of how the client is experiencing that and reporting that. An outside source can, be helpful, and so that could be pretty much any stakeholder in the client's life. So it could be, if you're working with kids, either in a clinical or school setting, it could be a parent, it could be a teacher, it could be a school counselor, it could be a clinical mental health counselor. It really just depends on your role and then who kind of the stakeholders around you and your client are. For clinical work, it may just depend on the setting. I mean, if you're working with adults, obviously you have to have permission to talk to anybody other than the adult, with the exception of a few kind of, safety concerns in inpatient settings where you may have that permission kind of built in. But, any kind of outside data point outside the client can be just a nice way to kind of validate what the client's experiencing or reporting to you, or what you're seeing, that it is actually happening out, in life, and those outcomes are being realized in real life. Satisfaction surveys are a common means of how did this process go, kind of measuring that, and a lot of clinical settings, especially, will use client satisfaction surveys. And I don't know. I haven't seen any research that looks at the correlation between kind of a satisfaction survey and then actual client outcomes, because someone could enjoy a process, but maybe they really haven't made that many significant changes, right? I mean, maybe they're not getting the full potential of the outcomes that they're looking for, but maybe they like the counselor and it's a safe environment and they rate it highly in terms of being satisfied. So, you can kind of take that with a grain of salt just as an additional data point. And then goal attainment measures. Generally, like we've talked about, we set some kind of goal at the beginning of the counseling process, and then we come up with some kind of construct to measure that goal. And that gives us a very kind of concrete thing to look at in terms of outcome evaluation. Did we reach the goal? Have we progressed towards the goal? Just a very kind of simple, what was the goal we set? And then where are we now? And where have we been along the way? All right. So preventing premature termination. So premature termination is what it sounds like in terms of a client removing themselves from the counseling process before kind of the full counseling process is played out. And so these are just some strategies that we know work for preventing a client from stopping therapy. And so I'll just go through a few of these. So, assess ruptures in the therapeutic relationship. If something has changed in the dynamics between you and the client, suddenly they've become very closed off, or maybe they're missing sessions, it seems like they're actively resisting or avoiding you, then addressing it can be really helpful. Not addressing it in kind of a like, what are you doing? You're not motivated to change. We're not trying to wag our fingers or, shame a client in any shape or form. That's actually going to probably lead to premature termination, but just inviting the client to talk about it, kind of acknowledging what's happening, inviting the client to talk about it, letting them know that you are wanting to make the relationship better for them and what they are wanting out of it is one of the ways we can help prevent premature termination. The next two, avoiding delays and then making contact with clients, are more just kind of, I think about them as more kind of administrative, but they are relationship building. So we know that, if a client, and this may be more applicable on the on the clinical side, although you can think of situations where this may be true on the school side. But if a client needs help now and it is going to be a couple weeks or a month or something before they're going to be able to get the help, chances are that they may go elsewhere for help, or they may just decide not to see. They may feel unmotivated at that point. And so avoiding delays is really important, and then making contact with clients. So, having some kind of regular contact, even if a client cancels or doesn't show up or they're, absent from school or something, having some kind of contact in place on a regular basis, we know helps clients maintain the therapeutic relationship. Not processing clients through several channels. And what that means is, in some clinical settings in particular, a client might call and make an appointment with administrative personnel at the site. Then they may do an intake with an intake specialist, and then they may eventually get to see a counselor, right? And so now they've gone through three different individuals before they get to the person that is actually going to be providing the care. And we know that when that happens, when there are more layers of people to go through and to meet and to talk to before you get to the person that actually wants to hear your story and help you make the changes that you want to make, the more layers you have, the more personnel you have in between there, the more likely a client is to stop coming. And so that's important just to think about in terms of the structure of your site. This does happen I know on the clinical side, in clinical sites where agencies or companies will, hire someone to do the intake. And I think this is kind of where the main, where this actually plays out in life is that someone will be hired to do an intake, generally for intake, kind of meaning kind of that data gathering and assessment phase. You can hire someone at a bachelor's level to do that. So you can pay someone less to do that kind of work. And that's why agencies will do it. It's a kind of a cost saving measure. But what it inadvertently does is it may lead to more clients dropping out of therapy because now again, they've been interacting with multiple people before they get to the person they want to develop a stronger relationship with. Reminders can be helpful. Having an automated system for reminders is fantastic. And there's lots of them out there, but whether it's an email or a text or a phone call or if you're in a setting where you actually see the client and be like, hey, remember, we're meeting, next Tuesday or whatever, we know that helps. Calling clients if they don't show, so not just letting things slide, but again, it's kind of that idea of making contact is make sure that the client knows that you are still engaged in the relationship and in the process, even if they are not, can be helpful. And then, making it easy for a client to return to services. So most places will have a policy in place on the clinical side of things. They'll have a policy in place where if a client cancels so many times or no shows so many times that their file will be closed out, meaning that they are no longer going to be booked for appointments. But making sure that you have a process in place where there's kind of an open door, like if you want to re-engage services, we're still open to it. Or, maybe a client just has stopped services, right? They kind of intentionally. It's not about missing appointments or not showing up. It's just that they have stopped services intentionally, and that's their choice. That's they have the autonomy to do that. So then making sure that the client knows that there is an open door that they can return at any time can be really helpful. And then renegotiating a treatment plan. That's mainly around if a client is thinking about stopping counseling because they don't feel like they're making progress toward the goal. So having a conversation about what the work is and how it's going and what's working and what's not working, and then coming up with a new strategy is a way to keep the client engaged in treatment. All right, so eventually we do have to, get to a place to where we are going to terminate the relationship, and that can happen a lot of ways. I mean, the ideal is that clients made progress towards their goal. Their goals have been reached, or at least significant progress has been made, and they feel like they can get the rest of the way there themselves. So, how do we do that? How do we go about the process of deciding, along with the client, if it is an appropriate time for termination? The most basic one is like, well, how's the presenting issue? Has it improved? Has it gotten to a better place? Does the client feel like it's gotten to a better place? Are they in a good place with it? If you're working with someone in the school has the problem behavior stopped as reported by either the client or the teacher. Have distress levels reduced, have coping skills improved. All these things that we expect to see happen throughout the process are good indicators of um, having a conversation, needing to have a conversation with the client around, are we at a place where you're good to go for the time being? Um, let's see here. So, these are just kind of data points that we're looking at. Um, does the client feel prepared to move forward from counseling? I think that's a really critical one because there's a difference between a client feeling better just overall and all of these other bullet points on here could have improved, but the client still is anxious about the counseling relationship ending, and that's something to talk about. The idea is that most clients, unless there's some kind of severe or just consistent, perpetual mental health issue that the client is working through or is going to be living with the rest of their life, just depending on what it is. The goal for most counseling processes and relationships is for it to end and for the client to be living autonomously and being able to navigate life in a healthier way outside of the counseling relationship. So, really helping the client understand that they are in charge of their life and that the counseling process, we're not doing anything to or for the client other than helping them through a process of self-discovery and really challenging themselves to make the changes that they're wanting to make. And so helping a client realize that they are the ones who have been driving the change. We are just facilitating a process where that can happen, can help instill some of that confidence of the client being the one that has made the change. And if they made the change within the counseling relationship, they can continue to make changes outside of the counseling relationship. But we do want clients to feel, at least mostly prepared to move forward from counseling. A lot of people have anxiety and, experience some grief or loss that the counseling relationship, this safe place and this, healthy relationship is ending. But that is kind of ultimately the goal, again, for most counseling relationships. In the school setting, a lot of the terminations may happen just kind of organically by kind of the sequential moving up through grades. And so, some of that happens organically in the school system, and some of it happens organically in clinical settings. If you're in an inpatient setting, then obviously the goal is to get the clients out and into, an outpatient service provider of some sort. If you're an outpatient, the goal is eventually to kind of step down services or have services taper off to where the client's living and making changes on their own. So how do we prepare for termination? This is the exact same slide as I just showed. So let's not do that one. So in general, the preparation for termination, you can ignore these bullet points. Apparently I didn't. I just retyped the same thing. Preparing for termination is something that we should do early on. And meaning not like at the beginning, but we should give clients a decent heads up that termination is coming up, that termination is on the radar, and it's a conversation you're having with a client. I mean, you're always checking with the client. Does it feel like it is an appropriate time to start talking about the counseling relationship ending? Based on the client's progress, right? I mean, it's always, kind of the client's done the work and gotten to a better place. Therefore, let's talk about whether this is needed anymore or not. So you can make those observations and introduce that conversation. The client may do it themselves. It can happen both ways, but it does need to be a conversation. You need to have kind of both you and the client's thoughts and assessment and evaluation of where the client is and the work they've done need to come together to inform the decision about termination of the relationship. Obviously, if the client's like, yeah, I'm done, There's not much we can do about that. We can still express our opinion or share our thoughts about kind of the client's progress. But if a client has autonomy to end the relationship at any point in time, so if they choose to end the relationship, that's on them. If we think the relationship ends, but if we think the relationship is at a place where it can begin to wind down because the client's had a significant progress, but the client does not feel that way, then that needs to be a conversation about what are their concerns, what are they seeing, how are they evaluating things in a way that's leading them to a different decision than us. And ultimately, again, this falls back on the client, right? I mean, it's the client has the autonomy to decide whether or not they continue in therapy. But it doesn't mean that it's not a co-constructive process with us, being open and honest about what we're seeing and experiencing as well. So we do want to give clients plenty of heads up. So, that could be a few weeks or a few sessions. We definitely don't want to be like, okay, well, I think you're good. Today's the last session. We want to intentionally kind of structure a process where the client knows it's coming, and we can have a conversation, if not a couple conversations, about the work that's been done, what the client is going to do next, how to maintain the progress, all those things that we want to think about when we're thinking about termination. But the main point is have a conversation and have a timeline. Like give the client a heads up about when we think the relationship's going to end. So Kessler's reaction to termination, it is a loss of a relationship. I mean, very literally, we're talking about ending a relationship very intentionally. It's a professional relationship, but it's still an intimate relationship where we've connected with a client on a cognitive level, on an emotional level, and we are kind of intentionally disconnecting, which is I mean, it's a bit odd. Most of those kind of emotionally intimate or cognitively intimate relationships we have with people, we don't just say, "Oh, things are going well, like we're really connecting, and let's stop this relationship." And so it's a bit of an odd thing. So it's just important to think about how we are reacting to that loss, and the worry it can create, not only the loss, but then kind of the anxiety around, well, how are they doing? Because for most of us, once we stop our work with our clients, that's it. It's not like we are going to necessarily see them again down the road. I mean, we may schedule like a follow-up or check-in down the road, but a couple of years down the road, if the client's still doing well and hasn't come back for services, then that's probably it. We're probably not seeing them again. And if you're working in a school system, you're probably not going to see them again. Once they graduate and kind of move on and are no longer in the setting, then the contact is no longer there. So it can just lead us, to have a lot of questions about if the client's doing well, did the work that we did with them stick? I always think about a lot of probably the end results of the work that we have done with clients, may not take place in the relationship. They may be the longer lasting effects of the work we've done are things that we don't get to hear about or we don't get to see because the client's out there living. So it is a unique professional relationship in that we end it very intentionally, and then we intentionally don't make contact again unless it's just some kind of check-in down the road. We do learn from our clients. I think that's one of the cool things about our work is that we get to, as we are kind of facilitating a process for client growth, we do learn a lot. Like we learn about ourselves, but we also learn about life, about how to navigate situations, about how to make changes, about how to deal with resistance and struggle. I mean, there's just so much that we get to see firsthand our clients work with. And inevitably, we take a lot from that as professionals who are in the change game. So there is a loss of learning from the clients. It can also be associated with loss in our own lives, meaning if we've had relationships that have ended that we have struggled with, whether the relationship ended on a good note or a bad note or a sad note or whatever it is, those those experiences can connect to a client for whatever reason. The client, maybe there's some um, connection we have with a client that they remind us of someone, or the relationship reminds us of a previous relationship we had, and now it's ending, and so it can just cause a lot of stuff to come up. So it's just good to be aware of it. And then there is some evidence that some counselors rely on the therapeutic relationship for intimacy or sexual attraction, meaning that maybe the counselor does not have relationships in their life outside of these professional relationships where they're really connecting with people. Maybe they're very lonely in their personal lives, and their professional life is serving as a mechanism for having that kind of intimate human contact, or sexual attraction. Maybe there's counselors might be relying on certain relationships with a client that they are really might be attracted to, that they are relying on that, and then ending the relationship severs that. Or maybe that attraction is preventing the counselor from ending the relationship because they don't want it to end. So, there's all these kind of interesting angles we have to think about in terms of our experience of ending a therapeutic relationship. And so it's just good to be aware of how you're experiencing and processing it. So, one of the pieces we always want to talk about with clients when we are terminating the relationship is that, the goal is that they are able to maintain or continue the growth that they have experienced within the counseling relationship. So, one of the ways to do that is to schedule a follow-up. And, again, depending on setting, that can look very different. If you're in a clinical setting, you may schedule it for a month or a few months out or 6 months out, just to see how the client's doing. I mean, it really is kind of checking in. It's not necessarily kind of jumping back into the therapeutic work. It's more just helping the client reflect on and process how they have maintained or struggled with the gains that they made in counseling. Um, so, follow up or booster check-in session, those are kind of the same kind of things. Self-monitoring, helping the client process, like, how are you going to know whether or not the growth you have experienced in here is maintaining or continuing improvement. So really putting the responsibility on the client and helping the client realize the responsibility, because it is their responsibility to think about, how do you make sure that you stay in this better place, or that you continue on to a better place? What are some signs that things may be going downhill again, or that the problem's coming back? So really just processing through what that self-monitoring looks like, and making sure that the client's leaving on a note of raised awareness around what to be looking for in terms of maintenance and presenting issues coming back later. Letter writing is a really interesting method. It's generally, at least most of what I've seen, is a client writing a letter to themselves, and then the counselor will agree to hold it for a designated amount of time, maybe a year or 6 months, and then mail it to the client. And this is a means of the client getting to essentially kind of talk to themselves as their previous self. So as the counseling relationship is ending, having the client write a letter to themselves talking about the process of growth, the growth that they've seen, the struggles they've had, how they've made changes, all those kinds of things, and really highlighting the growth and the responsibility that they have taken, and then kind of waiting a designated period of time and then sending that to the client so that 6 months or a year down the road they can reflect on and think about back to the growth that they experienced and what they did to make a positive change in their life. Self-help groups are also a good strategy, and these self-help groups being something that is kind of peer-led. So we're not talking about necessarily like a counseling group here where there's a designated professional facilitating things. This is more about peer support. Like the growth has at least the initial part of the growth has already happened in the counseling relationship, and now we're talking about maintenance or continued improvement and using peers as a means to support that process instead of a professional helper. All right, that's it, y'all. So that is evaluation and maintenance and termination. So we're talking about ending the counseling relationship, looking at the work we've done, seeing how the client's doing throughout the process. So hopefully that was helpful, and look forward to doing some work around this when we get in class. Bye, y'all.